It's a particular honor to be here today because we're in this decade of clear vision, right? 2020. We're stepping into a new decade, and we're honoring the conception and the implementation and the continued evolution of Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign on the eve of his birthday, the celebration of his birthday. And I've been spending a lot of time with one of Martin Luther King's sermons called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution, which says it's no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence. It's either nonviolence or non-existence. And the alternative to disarmament, the alternative to a greater suspension of nuclear tests, the alternative to strengthening the United Nations and thereby disarming the whole world may well be a civilization that is plunged into the abyss of annihilation, and our earthly habitat would be transformed into an inferno that even the mind of Dante could not imagine. So I grew up on the high plateau of the Blue Ridge. 40 years of my life up this mountain right over here, drinking pure water, breathing clean air, and learning to be a wise steward of fertile soil in Floyd County and the surrounding region. So when I found out about the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is an LLC whose primary investor, EQT, is one of the most reprehensible fracking corporations in the United States, was plotting to bury a pipeline through this fertile soil and through these pure waters, I said no. And I spent 5.5 years remaining awake. So if you were to drive through Salem and down 460 for about 15 minutes, you could give witness to the destruction wrought by the MVP. There's people in here who've seen it. People who've come from a long way away who've seen it. This is a 42-inch high-pressure fracked gas transmission line, which has wreaked havoc in rural Virginia and West Virginia for over 5.5 years. Right now, a courageous group of water protectors are living in trees to block construction. I was there right before I came to this meeting. They have lived in the trees for 502 days today. And we have had aerial resistance, civil disobedience, literally standing in the way of this pipeline for 2 years in February. And that's what stopped it. Because back in 2017, the Commonwealth of Virginia approved the water quality permits for this pipeline, at which point we said, if you will not protect our waters, we the people will. And we climbed up in trees. And there have been many arrests, there have been so much support, so much community built. It's a different form of civil disobedience, but it is what has worked. It's what has stopped it, kept it from cutting down those last few trees. And if you were to drive east for about an hour or so, you could give witness to the community of Union Hill, where the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, another 42-inch pipeline, was proposed. My friend Richard Walker spent the summers of his youth in Buckingham. He's been fighting the ACP for nearly 6 years. Many of you may know of our recent victory. After years and years of grassroots action supported by organizations all over Virginia and eventually the nation, after Dominion dangled payoff after payoff, after tree cutting, fraudulent use of eminent domain, again, Friends of Buckingham recently won a lawsuit that for the moment effectively overturns the air permit, which would allow one of the largest compressor stations ever proposed to be built in a place where it would compromise the air quality and therefore the health of this vulnerable community exponentially. Big business tends to try to exploit primarily Black and brown communities, but their tactics also apply to the poor. Corporate criminals tend to crack down on communities that have been historically marginalized, forced onto reservations, stripped of rights and religion, made to choose indentured servitude. And though we've tried, we've not adequately addressed the history and existence of superiority in this nation, especially in regards to the long-term effects of environmental racism and the stark inequities of environmental injustice. It's profoundly encouraging that Buckingham's continual resilience, diversity of tactics, and building of a beloved community empowered them to fight corporate greed. And it is incredibly inspiring that a coalition of grassroots groups and other broader allies could join together to defeat Dominion in the Fourth Circuit Court. But my friend Richard has taken it further, creating training programs for people who were formerly incarcerated and reaching out to other vulnerable populations within the community so marketable skills can be shared. And not only were those solutions applied in a way that could benefit this community economically, they are also involved the installation of solar panels so that the results did not simply create jobs but sustainability. They rendered the very need for fossil fuels irrelevant. But Buckingham has to stay wide awake because Dominion has historically controlled politics, and we have to continue to fight. And we would much rather fight by installing solar panels. Yes. So when Dr. King suggested that our earthly habitat would be transformed into an inferno, I don't think he was picturing pipeline explosions with a 2,200-foot wide incineration zone and a 1.4-mile wide blast zone. Between 2010 and 2015, there were 3,141 pipeline explosions or fires nationwide. And the newest pipelines are the most prone to failure. And we don't even know what this is going to do yet. I mean, the pipeline of this magnitude really hasn't been built. So the numbers I just quoted you can't really accurately reflect what might happen. We can guess, but really we just have to remain awake. And those who have effectively fought the MVP on the ground are predominantly the poor people. My friend Crystal Mello, for example, who lived in a tree for 3 days last spring. Crystal's a single mom and a grandma who works cleaning homes and offices, and she couldn't afford to stay up there longer than 3 days, given her responsibilities. But her heart told her that the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, was to accept suffering for the sake of a cause to achieve a goal. And she continues 502 days into this blockade to provide primary ground support to those who are sacrificing their safety and comfort to provide what our decision makers refused to provide, protections for our water, air, mountains, and communities. The MVP gravely miscalculated our ability to connect, communicate, collaborate, and build coalition, not only with those along the MVP, but with our friends and neighbors fighting the ACP as well. We haven't allowed them to divide and conquer. We've remained awake, and they seriously underestimated the devotion of the Appalachian people to these mountains. Red Terry and her daughter Minor lived in trees for 34 days in the spring of 2018, effectively blocking construction and creating a support camp and a movement that's become a rallying cry throughout Virginia and the nation. Stand with Red is now synonymous with pipeline resistance. And WANGA, Red Support Camp, which is an acronym for We Are Not Going Away, is chanted at rallies and protests by those who understand that our continued resilience, persistence, and stubborn refusal to swallow the poison of greed and corruption is why we will win. It's why we must win. Why we must take the success that our friends in Buckingham planted in the fertile soil of their community and share the seeds of justice in regards to the direct action currently fending off construction on the MVP for long enough that innovative legal strategies can take root in the soil of victory. So how do we do this? How do we declare our freedom from the shackles of greed and the corruption of bribery and the evil of deception? I wish I had an answer for you, but I'm here to raise the question. I am here to issue a challenge to all of us who are willing to stay awake, to speak truth to power, and resist corporate greed for our beloved communities. After 5.5 years of this, I'm not about to quit. at nearly 50 years old, I am not about to quit, and we need your help. Those of us who have resisted this nightmare for years are ready for it to transform into that proverbial dream of freedom. Freedom from abuse, from tyranny, from abject destruction. But we need your help. We need every shoulder at the wheel of justice. We must remain awake. I'm going to close by returning to the words of Martin Luther King, an awakening to his vision, which I and many others, including my dear friend BJ, are determined to realize. We are going to win our freedom because both the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And so however dark it is, however deep the angry feelings are, and however violent the explosions, I can still sing, "We shall overcome." We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth, crushed to earth, will rise again. And with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair the stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.